Good afternoon. Today's discussion is on the local authority delivery scheme in the north east of England and Yorkshire. We have two speakers with us today. We have Tom Jarman, who is from the North East and Yorkshire Energy Hub and the Tees Valley Combined Local Authority. And we have Nick Houston from Dakin. And hopefully they're going to provide us with some information on the local authority delivery scheme, how it's operating in the northeast of England, and how our members and companies in the northeast can get engaged with the scheme. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Tom if he would like to kick us off and say a few words.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for inviting us along to speak. I've got some slides to talk through, so I'll go through those. So I'll just share my screen. Like Kenneth was saying, I'm the manager. My contact details are down there, but I'm the manager on an interim basis of the North East and Yorkshire Energy Hub. The hub website is hyperlinked at the top there, and you can see with the various logos, those are the logos of the 6 LEPs that make up our the LEPs in the region of which we cover. The link with the Tees Valley Combined Authority is that the Tees Valley Combined Authority hosts the hub, but the hub covers the whole of the North East and Yorkshire. And there's a map on the Energy Hub website that shows you the geographic boundaries. So that's a picture from one of our community energy schemes just there, but the team consists of myself and a core team of 4. So we have a hub project manager, and she looks after projects and areas of work that cover the whole of the hub area. So an example of that is things like what we learn from project delivery and how we feed that back in. We've got a bus tour coming up soon, which is on one of the slides at the end. So because that's across the whole hub, she'll be covering that. We also have a housing retrofit project manager. And so the housing retrofit project manager, as it says on the tin, focuses specifically on housing. Housing retrofit is a particular skill, I think. So that's why it's good to have that specialism. We also have a program manager who leads in depth on some particular programs, but also brings us the coherence across all the different activities we're engaged with. And the way that we operate, is that within the 6 LEPs, we fund an energy manager within each LEP. And so we have 6 LEP-based energy managers, one of which, the Tees Valley one, is part of our core team. There are 31 local authorities within our area, and the hub is funded by BAYES. Our main role is to develop and deliver programs. So there'll be some programs where we're given funding to engage with people and build capability and develop what that program might look like. There's other funding we're given which is very directly delivery related. So we will be the body that engages with delivery partners and sets up the funding agreements and pays them to deliver. But our main role is to build capacity and capability for decarbonisation. So by capacity, I mean the amount of resources we can call on within the region to carry out decarbonisation and retrofit. So do we have a ready supply chain? Is it of sufficient quantity to meet coming demand? Is there the ability within the supply chain to do good quality retrofit, good quality decarbonisation work? Do we have the people trained? Do we have skills available? And capability refers more to ability, and I tend to view that as client capability in many cases, partly supply chain capability as in the ability to carry out work safely and well, but also there's a client aspect to that. We need clients to be able to specify work and engage with their supply chains in a way that means good quality work is more likely. Excuse me. I thought I'd just quickly show this slide about policy, because the policy landscape can look confusing, but I think it's reasonably straightforward. Some of the implementation is a bit chaotic, but there's a fairly clear direction of travel. The 10-point plan is quite significant. And what the government want to achieve with the 10-point plan is post-COVID economic growth. And they see the green economy, which is a very, very broad way of describing it, as a way to invest in businesses and build economic growth and decarbonize at the same time. The energy white paper and the heat and building strategy, I think, are currently delayed a bit, and they're plodding through the government process. But there is ultimately a net zero strategy. We have said and written it into law that we will be a net zero economy by 2050. So there's a very clear longer term ambition, even if some of the detail in the middle is still being formed. I think this is quite an interesting way to look at it as well. This is a chart from The Economist from a year or so ago, year and a half ago. And each of those bars, blue bars, represents the various carbon budgets. So the Climate Change Act mandates where we have to be in terms of carbon emissions. It also created the Committee on Climate Change, and the Committee on Climate Change set these budgets and monitor progress against them. And we haven't actually done too bad with the budget so far. That's partly because a lot of those budgets have contained some fairly easy wins. So if you look at the reduction in carbon emissions from power generation, that's been a very significant contributor to reducing carbon emissions overall. But we're now starting to hit the harder stuff, and you can see how that projection diverges away from where we should be quite dramatically. So although there's a clear direction of travel, there's a lot of attention needs to be paid to that bit in the middle in terms of how we actually set ourselves up to decarbonize. And that challenge has become more distinct because the targets have become more challenging. There was the announcement back in April about the 78% reduction by 2035 as a very significant milestone on the net zero ambition for 2050. So that actually just increases the challenges that chart captures. LAD and HUG. So I don't know to what extent you're aware of LAD and HUG, and I suspect we'll pick this up better through questions than me going through it in any great detail. You'll hear LAD and HUG quite frequently. LAD, LAD, stands for Local Authority Delivery. And we are currently in the second phase of Local Authority Delivery. The applications are open for the third phase, which has been given the much more user-friendly name of the Sustainable Warmth Competition. LAD is primarily aimed at low-income households on mains gas, and HUG, Home Upgrade Grant, is primarily aimed at low-income households who are off-grid. But they are both aimed at the worst EPC bands, E, F, and G, and they usually include Ds in the programme, although the percentage cap. So I think the cap for LAD 2 is 50%. You can't have any more than 50% of your programme as EPCD. And that percentage goes down for sustainable warmth. So they're trying to get people to focus on those worst performing properties. In the Northeast, we operate with this particular program, LAD2, via local authorities. So that means they use their existing procurement structures, which could be an existing framework they have, or accessing a procurement framework like NEPO or something like that, or directly procuring. A lot of them also work through main contractors, so they may have used a main contractor structure to deliver the work as well. But we didn't get directly involved in how they actually deliver it. So we'll probably pick this up in questions from the supply chain, but your point of contact would be local authorities and construction frameworks, procurement frameworks, because that's how they'll be accessing the services they need. Other hub areas have structured this differently. Some have larger core teams, some have a greater range of in-house skills, some have much more direct engagement with delivery. But that's the route we went down in the Northeast for various reasons. We now have a bigger team. So the core team I showed you earlier gives us more capacity to consider how we might do things differently in the future. But certainly at the time when these programs were coming out, there was a very small team. This is before my time, and that small team deserves a lot of credit for setting up what is a very significant delivery program. So challenges and plans. What's happened here? So the transitions have got a bit mad on this one, so I'll just call up the whole lot. In the immediate future, we have a new team. So of the 5 of us, 4 of us are new starters, including myself. So we all need to be brought up to speed at the same time as we're doing our normal ongoing program development and delivery for BAYS. I'm looking at doing some sessions in summer that start to pick up key themes, however, that have emerged over the past 2 months or so that I've been here. I think there's conversations we need to have with key clients, such as social landlords and in particular local authorities, around data and bid readiness. BAYS, in my view, are always likely to release their funding calls in a fairly but less than ideal way. They come out at quite short notice. There isn't much guidance before they come out. There's quite short bid writing windows and there's quite short delivery windows. So actually it's quite difficult to consistently gear up to deliver. Nonetheless, there is more bid readiness that people could do, because if that's the nature of how funds are going to be released, what we need to have is more projects that are ready to go so that we're not continuously caught out by funding calls. So I want to bring that up. I want to talk about delivery models and contracts and procurement so that people are procuring at the right time and looking more at who they're procuring and what those people are delivering, rather than defaulting to what's familiar, because those aren't always the best structures to deliver something like retrofit, which can be quite risky. The supply chain ecosystem. So we talk a lot about supply chain skills and training. I'm also interested in the ecosystem, as in the operating environment. So the Pharma Review, Modernize or Die, it captures this very well. But most of the supply chain is operating in an unstable, short-term, low-margin operating environment, and that is not an appropriate environment to deliver safe, good quality retrofit at scale. And so I want to start to talk more about the supply chain ecosystem and how clients create a good ecosystem that can build resilient supply chains that then have the confidence to invest in skills and training and quality and performance and innovation. And again, safe, good quality retrofit in itself. We talk about retrofit a lot, and we talk about delivering retrofit at scale a lot. I'm really keen to focus us on delivering safe, good quality retrofit at scale. I do tend to say that delivering retrofit actually isn't that difficult. It's just delivering it safely and well. That's much, much harder. And our website, we need to do some work on the website, so it's a better source of information for householders and the supply chain. So it will currently tell you quite a bit about what we do, but if you are a supply chain member, it won't give you much information about how you access those contracts, how you can talk to those clients. And we are very keen for the supply chain to talk to those clients because they need access to good quality supply chain members. So we can do some work with the website that better links up those parties. We also have marked up the transitions on this one as well, haven't I? We also have the COP26 bus on our way. COP is the Conference of Parties taking place in Glasgow. It's the next big climate conference in the first 2 weeks of November. And it hits our region with a flagship event at Harrogate on the 15th of October and trundles through the following week up to Gateshead with a itinerary of smaller stops in between. So that's the bus. It's an electric bus. We are mandated by BAYS to get case studies from throughout the region. So decarbonisation stories. So that's practice and what people are doing as demonstrators, for example, what sort of things they're trying to innovate. And also the BAYS team are very keen on business engagement with that. Again, linking back to that economic opportunity coming from the green economy. So if I'm on holiday after today, and then we need to do a bit more concentrated work on what's happening with the bus. So Kenneth and Gary, I'll keep you in touch with that because that might be of use to your membership as well. And obviously we'd be keen to keep them engaged with what the schedule is if they do want to go to an event which is in their neighbourhood. And yeah, that's it. That's my lot. I shall exit my Twilight world and stop sharing. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions on that. But now I'd like to ask Nick Houston from Dakin to say a few words.
Kenneth, I'll just share my screen. Right, can everybody see that? All right.
Yep, that looks good.
Brilliant. So, yeah, there's quite a sort of mix of people sort of joined today. So I'll try and pitch us as best I can, because we've got quite a few installers and delivery partners, as well as a couple of local authorities and housing providers. So, yeah, I'll try and sort of focus it on the right kind of areas. I've probably delivered elements of this presentation before, so yeah, apologies if anybody's heard me sort of drivel on before if I'm covering the same thing, but yeah, I'll try and bring it up to date as much as possible, because this is a very fast moving agenda at the moment. So yeah, if anybody doesn't know me, I'm a future energy business manager with Dakin, who obviously manufacture heat pumps. But my background's very much in the public sector. I work really closely with the supply chain and installers at the moment, and just trying to make sense of all this government funding and try and provide the right support in the right areas. So that's sort of my role within Dakin. So this follows on really nicely from sort of Tom's presentation. So I'll just give you a bit of a reminder of what's happening in government in terms of net zero, and why we're suddenly in a period of what seems to be pretty frantic out there. There's lots of funding opportunities, lots of things coming out of government in terms of policies and new strategies, but it's creating an awful lot of opportunities, which is good. There's never been so much funding out there, although it's not always easy to access. There's certainly plenty of opportunities. So I'll give a bit of an update on funding, as well as how Dakin and myself can support both local authorities and installers access all this and make the most of these opportunities. So that's the plan for the next 10 minutes or so. So yeah, as sort of Tom touched on, yeah, we're in a world of net zero and 10-point plan and decarbonisation. And you'll see in here lots of these terms, and all we're trying to do, really, all government's trying to do, is just trying to reduce carbon emissions, essentially. So that's what it's all about. And the biggest challenges to do that is at the moment through heating, and also through domestic residential homes. They're the sort of biggest challenges, and that's because there's still an awful lot of houses out there still heated by gas. So this is the big focus at the moment, to try and reduce the reliance on boilers and move away into other renewable and lower carbon heating sources. So that's essentially the plan, and why there's so much funding out there. So yeah, there's lots of terms like decarbonisation and electrification of heat. It essentially all means the same kind of thing, just trying to reduce those carbon emissions and move away into low carbon or zero carbon solutions. So yeah, there's lots of new policies and standards. The future home standards came out, and that was suggesting it's going to have a target of no new build can have any gas boilers in by 2025. We're still waiting for the heat and building strategy, which has been imminent for a little while now, but that's going to have a lot of plans in there for the next sort of 5 to 10 years, and how we're going to deal and tackle with all this. That's a big strategy that's due out very soon. In Dakin ourselves, we've got our own sort of Energy for Change campaign. So we're positioning ourselves pretty much as a key sort of delivery partner. So yeah, we certainly don't just sell heat pumps. In my role in particular, looks at sort of whole house approach. I work with lots of different installers. I'll try and do sort of fabric first and whole house approach. So yeah, I support insulation just as much as I do heat pumps and low carbon heating. But yeah, I think we're all sort of in this together, really. And yeah, obviously we've got quite a few key partners I work with, and we're sort of looking to grow that as well. So again, Tom just briefly touched on the 10-point plan. The key point for us within that was obviously creating 50,000 jobs, but also a target to install 600,000 heat pumps every year by 2028, which is a hugely challenging target. Just to give you an idea, last year, the whole industry, not just Dakin, installed 35,000 or just under 35,000 heat pumps. So that's a big jump from 35 up to 600,000 by 28. Yeah, and I think obviously government are trying to reduce carbon emissions, as I've just said, but it's also about just trying to create new jobs and moving to this sort of post-COVID recovery. So there's lots of added value when you're trying to reduce carbon, because you do tend to reduce energy bills as well, which in turn helps alleviate fuel poverty. And because there's so much funding around, it can obviously stimulate lots of green jobs and opportunities. So there's lots of win-wins with this sort of sector at the moment. Yeah, so just a figure I touched on in terms of heat pump installs across all manufacturers. So yeah, I just said 35,000 there in 2020. need to be at 600,000 by 28 according to Boris's 10-point plan, and then well over 1 million by 2035. So that's a pretty significant growth. And lots of the heat pump manufacturers are predicting significant growth for 2021 as well. Certainly Dakin have seen 30-40% growth within our sort of sector. And there's lots of new heat pump manufacturers coming into the market, and they're experiencing pretty rapid growth. So that 70,000 should and probably will be hit, if not exceeded, this year. So the growth is very much here and now. These are the same figures, but just shows where the growth areas are. So it is obviously new build because of the things like the future home strategy, stopping gas boilers going into new homes in 2025, but also retrofits, all those existing buildings with essentially with gas boilers in there. Once you start taking those out and putting heat pumps in, you'll see a huge growth. There's obviously lots of challenges to do that. It isn't just a case of taking the boiler out and putting the heat pump in. But yeah, that's certainly where sort of BEIS and the Committee on Climate Change, where these figures came from, that's their sort of projections. And this is a slide that shows really the opportunities, because to install well over 1 million heat pumps a year, you've got to have a lot of installers to do that. And when this chart was put together, there was just over 500 MCS installers for heat pumps. That did grow to well over 1,000 last year, as sort of BEIS and the Committee on Climate Change projected. So I think the last time I checked, there was about 1,100 MCS installers. But you can see there that the growth in the number of installers is going to have to be pretty rapid over the sort of coming years till we get to 2030. So yeah, that is a huge challenge. So obviously lots of new businesses enter the markets. Great. We need to try and train and support existing plumbers and electricians, get them trained onto heat pumps. Startups, apprenticeship schemes. I do a lot of work with colleges and universities. So yeah, any opportunity really that we need to talk to and support and train new installers, we're happy to do that. And Dakin itself, we've got a free training program for any new installers that are interested in doing this. Either they might have installed heat pumps a few years back, or they might be completely new to it. Yeah, we're more than happy to talk to you and take you on our journey. Yeah, again, so Tom touched on this, so I'll just talk about the funding in terms of the sort of timescales and opportunities. So the LAD scheme, the Local Authority Delivery Scheme, all these acronyms, but yeah, LAD has been around since last summer. We've had quite a few different phases of it. We're pretty much in the middle of it all at the moment. They've all sort of been combined and merged a little bit. So we've got phase 1A, phase 1B and phase 2 all being delivered at the moment, with a plan to be completed by December, although we're waiting to see if BEIS are going to allow us a bit of an extension until the end of March for that, but at the moment it is December. So those 3 phases account for 500 million, so it's pretty extensive funding. The work itself covers all 10 years and has to be spent by December, as I've just said. There's still very much opportunities here for installers and supply chain. There's some sort of principal contractors who have got quite a few of the contracts. There's still opportunities to work with them. And like Tom mentioned, just contact your local authority as well if there's some potential work in your area. But yeah, there's certainly plenty of work that needs to take place between now and December or March if it gets extended on LAD. The other half of this, or the other 3/4 rather, was the Green Homes Grant Voucher Scheme. And although that in itself ended in December, BEIS are very much still processing applications, so yeah, there's still certainly plenty of funding around for that Green Homes Grant, which was, if you remember, like a voucher-based scheme. So households were able to bid for funds through a voucher scheme. So yeah, it's closed for new applications, but I think we've got another 3 or 4 months of sort of time that BEIS is still processing these applications. Then the Sustainable Warmth Competition. So this is the sort of hot potato at the moment, the one that's out now and live. And we're rapidly getting through the 7-week window that we've got. Closes on the 4th of August. So it's about 2 weeks' time, I think. It's 350 million, quite a challenge. So yeah, 7 weeks isn't long to try and get bids in. If anybody's really interested in this, I've got a completely separate presentation, which I'm happy going through if anybody wants the sort of finer detail on it. But just as a snapshot, yeah, it's 350 million. It's made up of another LAD round, so LAD 3, which is 200 million, And then there's also a new scheme called HUGS, which is Home Upgrade Grant Scheme. And this is the first part of HUGS, so it's HUGS 1 it's called, and that's 150 million, so that makes up the 350. It is all 10 years, but it is really focused on private sector. So yeah, they're expecting sort of 90% of the work to be in the sort of private sector and just 10% on sort of social infill. So for housing associations, this isn't really fit for you guys. You're going to be directed towards a social housing decarb fund, which is, I'll come to in a second. But yeah, so sustainable wealth competition out there now. By all means, get bids in. The one benefit that we've got of this window at the moment is that work doesn't start until January. So there is a genuine opportunity to, in the application form, to almost leave that install a bit blank. Not blank in terms of leave the section blank, but you don't have to name an installer. So what that does is just allows you to understand your local supply chain, maybe look at local frameworks, maybe DPS frameworks as well, and just have a few months to sort of take stock and work out who you want to do that work for you. So it is quite a good opportunity, and it's something that Tom's mentioned before as well. So by all means, I'm sure Tom and his team will be happy talking to you about supporting that kind of role as well. So yeah, so it's out there now, got a couple more weeks of this scheme. And then there's a couple of other funding pots. So the renewable heat incentive's been around for the last 12 years or so, but that is changing on the 1st of April to a new scheme called Clean Heat Grant. Now this has been out for consultation a couple of times, and we're just waiting to see what the final version of the scheme looks like, but it is due to start in, I say due to start in 1st of April because I've just heard there might be a small gap between the two, but yeah, certainly April, May time, Clean Heat Grant will start. It's going to change from the 7-year quarterly sort of repayment kind of scheme it was in the past to an upfront grant. The consultation, so I suggested that would be £4,000, but yeah, it could be a little bit higher. It's a flat rate, so you'll get £4,000 if it's a 1-bed flat or a 4-bedroom house. So yeah, we'll expect the guidance on that to come out autumn time, so yeah, early September-ish. So yeah, we'll see more detail when that comes out. And the Home Upgrade Grant Scheme, which is what I've just touched on, sort of HUGS, this is a sort of first part of it. In the overall scheme is something like 2.5 billion. And that was written into the Conservative manifesto a couple of years back. So yeah, we don't know whether we're going to get all that funding, but it's just to say that the pot itself is pretty large. So yeah, there's going to be more phases and more round of HUGS to come. The big difference between LAD and HUGS, there's a lot of overlap to it, but essentially the LAD scheme is for on-gas properties and HUGS is for off-gas. So that's the big difference. And the other one is that HUGS supports more sort of whole house approach, so you can get funding up to £25,000. Unlike LAD, which is just 10,000. So there's a little bit of difference there in terms of the funding part of the criteria, but essentially the same list of measures is very similar. And then a couple of other big pots of funding. One is the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which came out last year as a demonstrator pilot scheme. It was quite a large demonstrator because it was 62 million was awarded. This is really the fund that social housing providers have been directed towards. And there's just been a social housing retrofit accelerator scheme or group set up to support both local authorities and housing associations to access this. So that's just been launched. It's been managed by an organisation called Turner and Townsend, who are helping to sort of facilitate all this. So there's certainly going to be plenty of help there for organizations to access this, and also for the supply chain to be able to find out what's going on and make connections and link networks with the potential clients. So the scheme itself, again, we're waiting to see the detail and the guidance in the autumn, but it's going to be more sort of whole house, deep house retrofit, higher values. So the basic spec work to cost between sort of £15,000 and £30,000. On the pilots last year, there was a fair bit of match funding requirement required of sort of 50-60% from housing providers. So again, we need to see if that's going to continue or whether it'll be more sort of heavily subsidised. The next round of phase is going to be 160 million, so that they have announced the figure, and we think it's going to be sort of early August time when this comes out. The date of the 5th of August was mentioned earlier on, which is the day after the Sustainable Warmth competition ends or closes, so that wouldn't be untypical it is to start on the following day, but we'll see what happens on that date. The other one is the public sector decarb scheme. So again, that came out as a very large demonstrator last year of it was £1 billion allocated. So again, in the autumn, we're expecting this to come back out. And this is more for sort of public buildings and schools. So yeah, more for local authorities than housing providers. Yeah, and this is just a couple of slides I put about how we can support, how Dakin and myself can support both clients, whether it's local authority or housing associations or the supply chain and installers. So yeah, as I said earlier, we're sort of see ourselves very much as a delivery partner. So yeah, we could help with the whole development of schemes, whether it's looking at stock and working out what properties are best suited for heat pumps or levels of insulation. We can help with targeting, whether it's EPC or deprivation or fuel poverty data. We can certainly work with private landlord teams or social housing providers or local authorities directly if it's private sector work you want to target. I do a lot of these kind of presentations on sort of heat pumps and what they are, and just trying to break down barriers really with heat pumps and low carbon heating, to try and get them onto the sort of agenda of these kind of funding schemes. So yeah, if you want to learn about heat pumps in particular, I've got another presentation I can go through with that, which just sort of sets out what they are, how they work, and the key benefits, what have you. We absolutely support local installers. So yeah, again, if you're a new installer looking to get into this market, brilliant, come and talk to us and we'll take you through our journey in terms of full training and support all the way through. If you're a existing delivery partner and want to get into this kind of market and install heat pumps where you might not have done before, then again, come and talk to us and we can certainly work with you. There's an awful lot of work across the northeast and beyond at the moment, so the opportunities have never been so great. So now's definitely the time to start thinking about this. And yeah, we'll certainly help identify work with you. We'll carry out surveys and design support. We've got a lot of support in terms of resident consultation as well, because we do appreciate that even though we've installed heat pumps for a long time, there's still a little bit of unawareness across the sort of general public. So yeah, we've got a lot of tools that we use to support residents, things like user guides. We've got a demonstration van which we can bring up to estates and communities. We've got videos, we've got frequently asked questions. We've got all sorts of stuff which we can just talk to residents and communities with. And also do a lot of work with sort of business growth teams and skill centres and academies and colleges. So yeah, anything that can just help support the sort of wider industry and the construction industry with just trying to give them training and support and identify these kind of opportunities. So yeah, obviously very familiar with all the kind of funded criteria and projects. So you know, often get asked by local authorities and housing associations in particular, can you just help us to make sense of it all and work out what funds are best and when, and we could come up with like a 3 or 5 year program in terms of trying to maximize all these funding pots. So something that I can certainly do. And there's also a lot of eco funding out there still. We work with quite a few eco delivery partners, so it often gets overlooked with all this sort of LAD funding and government funding, but yeah, eco funding can still very much fund a lot of the smaller measures on the lists for things like LAD. So to give an example, like loft insulation and loft top-ups and cavity wall insulation can all be funded under LAD, but there's also a lot of eco funding still out there that can fund that. So it's just been a little bit smart about using the right pots in the right way, and we can certainly introduce you to some good eco partners to help cover these costs in installs. Yeah, and obviously just education is really key when it comes to talking with residents. So I've just covered a lot of this in terms of letters and guides and videos. But yeah, essentially just the opportunity is huge at the moment. So yeah, come and talk to people like Tom and myself, and we'll help you all the way. And that's it. That's my details there. I'm just going to stop sharing this.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nick. That was very informative. So I think it's time for questions. So the first question that I have is, I think it's one for you, Tom. Is there a list anywhere of the projects that have been approved for LAD funding across the Northeast?
It depends a bit what you mean by projects. So with the LAD scheme, local authorities apply for that, and they're either successful or they're not. But across the Northeast, every local authority has been successful at one stage or another. Excuse me, I've got a slight cold. So currently within phase 2 of our 31 local authorities, 28 are engaged in phase 2. And the ones that aren't engaged in phase 2, it's because they've got quite a busy run over from phase 1. So that's one aspect of it. And this is why I was saying earlier that because they're using their familiar means of procurement, if you're in the supply chain and you want to access that work, it is a case of contacting those local authorities and finding out who they are using. It's also a case of contacting procurement frameworks and finding out to what extent, what opportunities they're offering. So it's a bit clumsy, excuse me, and there is work we can do as a hub to make that slightly smoother. It's just going to take time. The other thing that's probably worth being aware of is it's a measures-based approach. So if I share my screen, this will take a minute, but it's probably worth showing you this. So I'm just going to share my screen a second.
Yep.
So actually, I need to open a page up. So if you go on to, if you Google, just because I don't know if with Zoom, it sort of, I think it freezes the scheme, the page that you're showing, doesn't it? Rather than it sort of changes dynamically. But if you Google sustainable warmth, that will take you quite quickly to the gov.uk sustainable warmth competition site. And of the documents on there, there's a document called application form. And if you open up that application form, there's 3 tabs at the bottom and you want the middle one. There's introduction, application form, and do not use. So if you click on application form, and then if you scroll down, there's a box that lists measures. And when we say these competitions are measures based, what that means is what BEIS are judging is the individual interventions. So you can have a single house that has several measures, or just 1 or 2 measures. So the measures are external wall insulation, cavity wall insulation, underfloor, and it goes through a total of about 15 different measures. And so it's probably useful. The reason I say that is it's probably useful for your membership to check out those application forms, because they will suggest to them, it will start to pull out what their specialisms are and therefore how they link into the work that's going on. And then I would suggest that it is a case of using your trade networks and other people like that to understand what activity is taking place. So the role of the hub isn't necessarily to provide that direct linkage, but we can provide better visibility, which we currently don't, and we're aware that we do need to do. The other thing that's worth, in the coming months, we're going to have some sessions that start to pick this up as well. And one of the things we want to make local authorities aware of is things like DPS frameworks, the dynamic purchasing system frameworks, which are much more fluid in terms of as your supply chain members get skilled up. They're much more fluid in those being able to go on to those frameworks rather than being frozen out of a fixed term construction framework. So that's the picture in terms of how you might access some of the programs. It's just a bit of a clumsy picture.
Well, following on from that, LMF has asked, how do we actually onboard to the North East LAD scheme? Are there any links? Is it through a DPS or similar? So,
well, the way to do it is to contact the local authorities and talk to them about how they are delivering it, because they should tell you who they're using. So they might be using a main contractor, so they might be using an Eon or an NG or someone like that, or they might be using a procurement framework. The one I'm most familiar with personally is NEPO, the Northeast Purchasing Organisation, but there are several others throughout the region. But it is so my advice would be contact local authorities and find out who their delivery partner is, and contact construction frameworks and find out to what extent they're engaged in LAD. And what we intend to do on the website is have that information more visible, but we're just not there yet. I keep saying we've got a team, but we don't have capacity, because up until weeks ago, the energy hub consisted of one person. Now it's 5 people, 4 of which are new. So there's lots we need to do, and but we just can't do all of it as quickly as we would like. But I mean, a service that your trade association might be able to do some of that on your behalf, might be able to do that, contacting local authorities to build up a picture, because they will all be engaged in LAD to some degree or another. And so a trade association could ring up local authorities, ring up construction frameworks within the region, and find out what that picture looks like.
Thank you, Tom. I don't know if you want to come back on that, LMF. I know you don't have a microphone usually, but just checking.
And just to add as well, on the BA's website, there's actually a list of successful LAD 1A and 1B local authorities on there. So that's a good source of information. They haven't got the LAD 2 stuff on there, but they will have the sustainable warmth competition when that concludes as well. So just keep an eye on the BA's website, because it does have lists of successful organisations on there.
If I can just add to that as well, we have some of the local authorities as members. What I'll do is I'll touch base and find out all of the local authorities and get in touch with them all, try and find out who's responsible, and try and get an email out to everybody with all of the varying contacts.
Thank you, Gary.
We can, if we haven't done it already, we can give you a list of the local authorities in our area. What we aren't set up to do, what we would love to do, but we can't, is give you the contact details within that. So over time, I mean, months rather than years, we will have to get those contact lists sorted out. We'll have to get the GDPR sign off. We will have to provide better visibility for people in our region who want to engage in this program. But we can send you a list of the 31 local authorities, if that gives a starting point.
That'd be a great help, and then I can go to each of them. I've got somebody in the office that can work on this with me, so we can formulate a proper list with all the contacts and get them out to everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. There is a follow-up from LMF, basically saying, yeah, I can email 31 local authorities, but with delivery by the end of 2021, I would imagine they're already fairly advanced on this. So what sort of stages are the local authorities at? Are there still contracts that people can get involved in, or is it too late?
I'd be very surprised if it's too late. So I'll answer that question in a couple of ways, and then I'm sure Nick will have a supply chain view as well. But with those local authorities which we're working with, they are all now mobilizing to deliver. So they will have contracts in place, but there will still be opportunities there, in the sense that I'd be very surprised if their supply chains were fully staffed. Secondly, they are generally experiencing shortages. So if you can help fill shortages, I think they'll be interested in talking to you. And also, quite a few of them have used main contractors, but those main contractors in turn obviously need subcontractors and supply chain members. So, and it's no secret to say that E.ON are quite active in the region, that ENGIE are quite active in the region. So, I'm sure they would appreciate an approach from people who can form part of their supply chain. So you're not boxed out by any means. Secondly, although the stop-start nature of the funding doesn't give this impression, it is actually fairly consistent. So when this local authority delivery scheme ends, the next one will kick off in March 2022. And so although that feels as though there's a gap from December to March, I am fairly sure most people aren't going to have completed the work by December, given that we're at the end of July now. So there is much more continuity of work there than the way the funding is released often gives the impression. So I'd say there's still opportunity out there, and there's opportunity as this funding runs at the moment up until March 2023. But you saw from the charts I showed you that there's a massive need for decarbonisation. And so there will absolutely be more funding. There will be more competitions. There will be more releases. So yeah, it's well worth trying to become part of the delivery program because there's consistent long-term opportunity there. There was a question as well about DPSs in the chat, and we're not looking to set up a DPS because there are already some very well-structured DPSs that we can access. So what we're going to do is some work with local authorities to say, there are these DPSs, they've been created in the past several months, they're very well suited for retrofit. So we don't see the need to duplicate that work. There's some decent DPSs out there. We just need to make people aware that they're available for them to use.
Do you want to come back on that, Duncan? I think that's in response to your comments. So, Duncan McCrombie.
Thank you, Ken. I think from my perspective, Tom, it's just making sure that you really allow the smaller installers to be involved. A lot of the government focus is on building energy efficiency, not just at scale with the Eons and the ONGs. It's about building at a local level, and it's about getting people to retrain and do things in a different way, as we as we heard through from Nick earlier. So it's making sure you remove the barriers from allowing the small contractors to play in this, and the DPS is one of those ways of having something which allows the smaller players to take part, build the skills, build their businesses, employ more people, train more people, etc. going forward.
Absolutely. But it's not directly in our gift. That's the issue. So that the clienting for this work rests generally with local authorities, and also as Nick was saying, with the social housing stock, it will rest with social landlords. So one of the things we are talking about with those clients is what I was referring to as the supply chain ecosystem. So if you have if you have ambitions to support your SMEs, to support employment, to support community resilience, local investments, then you need to translate that into how you client this work at a local level. So that's what we're talking to local authorities about in terms of how they can link this investment with economic growth and stability in their own communities. But that isn't within our remit as an energy hub to deliver in that way.
It's not outside your remit. Sorry for being a bit pokey, Tom, but it's not outside your remit either. It's to make sure that energy efficiency measures are delivered in an appropriate and efficient way. And I get the feeling that something like a DPS, which it could be promoted, would prevent 30 or 40 subcontractors contacting 30 different local authorities, and each local authority getting 30 calls from a different subcontractor cannot be an efficient way of local authorities managing their time or getting energy efficiency measures installed within properties in their area. So actually coming together under a framework, be that DPS or something else, and I do have nervousness about frameworks because you set, not you personally, but frameworks are set up and then they kind of cycle through every 5 years, in which case if you weren't on the framework 5 years ago, you're not able to get play your part. And there is a lot of people in the Northeast and North Yorkshire that really want to move this agenda forward, and it's about making it as easy as possible for them to play, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, but we aren't, the Energy Hub isn't the client for this work. So we are working with clients, and we actively challenge them in terms of the clienting value. We will actively challenge them to what extent they are genuinely building up capacity and capability if they sub out to a main contractor. So we are pushing in that direction. And also there is a perfectly good DPS available, which the Northwest Energy Hub have developed with Procure Plus, that is specifically set up to enable the engagement with small suppliers. So that's why it's so critical that we go to local authorities and we say, you need to be aware of this. And if this is your local economic ambition, then you need to engage with these DPSs because they can help you realize it. but we're not a clienting body for retrofits. We're a strategic body with a degree of influence.
And your strategic body, as you mentioned with the electric bus, Tom, is demonstrating good practice and case studies. And if the case study of the Northwest DPS is one which could move itself the other side of the country, that would be a really good influence in demonstrating that good practice and excellent case studies are migrating their way through the hub on the Northeast as well.
Yeah, yeah. But I am extremely keen to get people using not only that DPS, but others that are much better set up for retrofit and much better set up for SMEs than a lot of the arrangements that they're currently familiar with and kind of defaulting to because they're familiar.
Thank you, Tom. I'll shut up because I seem to monopolize things. So Kenneth, thank you very much.
Thank you, Duncan.
So Ken, I need to just go off camera for a few minutes. I need to move rooms. So I've not gone anywhere.
Okay.
I just need to go somewhere else in the house, which will take a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to turn
Gary's
off camera.
about to ask a question. So I'll go to Gary and then we'll come back to you.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, my point, which follows on from Duncan, the DPS, as we are aware through the 4 other LAD schemes, I believe DPS is being used for the Northwest, the Midlands and the Greater South East. The only one the DPS is not being used on, I believe, is the Southwest. My question was going to be to Tom, if you go on to any of these 3 other DPSs and put your details in and sign up for that DPS, is that then available for the North, East and Yorkshire to use? Otherwise, why mention it?
Yeah, Gary, from my point of view, some of them, I mean, there's DPS, there's like DPS and then there's like sort of full procurement framework. So I think Procure Plus is probably like a full framework. The DPS, the dynamic purchase and sort of agreement systems are, my view is like much more user friendly. They're very easy to access, easy for installers to access, and the open frameworks, you can join any time. So it suits the world we're in now, where we've got lots of new installers coming to the market that it takes time to get MCS and Trustmark and past 2035. And when they do that, they need to be able to access a framework then and there. And a lot of these open DPSs can. And the other point is that they're also free to access for local authorities, which is really key, because not all frameworks are. So there is, like Tom said, there's some very, very good frameworks. It is finding the right one for the Northeast. And I think we've seen, because each of the 5 energy hubs have done it differently, as you're well aware of, Gary. So there is lessons to learn on both sides, and I think the Northeast had a bit of a head start getting the funding out. But then it's probably fair to say that some local authorities have struggled a little bit with procurement. So it's getting that balance right. But yeah, it's a tricky one.
But that doesn't answer my question. Sorry. My question was, because there may be some people on this call that have already signed up to either the Midlands or the Northwest DPS. Is there a way we can actually make that information available to the local authorities covering Yorkshire and the Northeast? Or it may well be a case of that Tom speaks to Jimmy or Michael at the other energy hubs and says, right, okay, can we share can we share the DPS rather than reinventing the wheel? As Tom rightly said, we don't need to speed things up. If we want to deliver stuff by the end of the year, government's about to go into recess. They're going to come back after recess, probably announce another scheme. And this is going to be lost in translation. LAD 3 will be coming out and there won't be any time to get anything done. And I think the concern for the supply chain is, if you're telling us that the sustainable warmth thing finishes on the 4th of August, which is a couple of weeks away, we need to get on board, we need to get going. Green Homes Grant is great, but unfortunately, as you rightly said, there's no more vouchers. And there's not an awful lot of vouchers actually that have been applied for coming out at the moment. You know, it's like it's a very tightly squeezed tap, and therefore there's not a lot. And I'm being asked, what's the next thing? by members. You know, what do we do next? And we talk about the lad scheme, and they're all saying, well, it's taking far too long to get on. You know, we've been running these calls since May, and they're still waiting for contracts to be signed. You know, and I'm talking about people that have been put in place to run these things in the southeast. You know, it's just taking forever to get started. We're going to have no time now. As far as I'm concerned, with the price increases and the shortage of product, there may well be an extension on LAD 2. No one's going to tell us that, but I would suggest running it to the end of March is probably the best thing that could happen to allow us a bit of time to get some of this stuff delivered. Sorry, Tom, what I was saying was, with, I think 3 of the other 4 areas are running a DPS. Southwest are not. They're running direct with managing agents, but there's definitely a DPS in the Midlands and the Greater Southeast. Is there an opportunity? What I actually said was, if you've got these other 3 DPSs, how easy would it be for supply chain for Yorkshire and the Northeast to sign up to the other DPSs, and those companies be available for the local authorities in your region to be able to use?
As far as I know, that's the intention. So a couple of them are live. One is due to go live fairly imminently. But that's the idea, is it gives supply chain members in our patch a route to market, and a flexible route to market, and it gives clients such as local authorities access to a greater range of suppliers than they would otherwise have. So that's why I'm not particularly keen to set up another DPS, because there's at least 3 there that are decently structured for retrofit that we will be able to access in our region.
Okay, so from an association point of view, would our advice be sign up for the Northwest or Midlands DPS?
What I'm talking to the other hub managers about is a session about the 3 DPSs that exist, and then people can take a decision from there. I wouldn't really be in a position to recommend one over the other. It's more a case of making people aware of what's available, and they can take a decision accordingly.
Would you like us to orchestrate that for you? I know Jimmy, I know Michael.
Yeah, no, that's
I'll bring the supply
yes.
chain to you.
Yeah. Okay. We'll catch up about this outside this meeting. That would make sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
We have had a couple of questions about DPSs and frameworks in general. One of the questions that we keep getting asked is insurance. Are the insurance hurdles being asked in most local authority frameworks a hurdle to small businesses getting involved in LADs too? Because they basically have minimum insurance requirements that are outside the scope of small installers.
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it may depend a bit on the individual local authority. I think there is a lack of understanding within local authorities about what it is like to operate as a small business, and insurance is just one aspect of that. So, and one point, so I'm contracting into this role, but I'm actually an independent consultant. I'm just on as in an interim management position while TVCA look for a full-time post holder. So I have those conversations with my other head on, in terms of how clients understand their SMEs within their area. And one of the things which I keep talking about is what SMEs want to do is invest. They want to invest in the things we want them to invest in, which is training and skills and employment and local economic growth and better quality performance, better quality projects. And they don't operate in an environment where clients reward and incentivize them doing that. And so I think that's the bigger issue. And insurance is just a sort of, is just one of the issues that comes up within that lack of understanding. So I don't entirely know what the answer to that is, but this is why when we talk about clienting to local authorities, that's why it's important to talk about clienting, because they're the key influencer in terms of how those SMEs operate and invest and grow. I don't know whether, I mean, Nick might have more experience of that directly from me, but certainly, I suppose another thing we could work on together is we do have regular contact with BEIS. One of the subjects of those conversations in terms of economic growth is how we're enabling capacity and capability in the local supply chain. So if there are particular supply chain issues, such as insurance, I suspect there are a collection of issues, then they are genuinely interested to know more about that. So that might, again, that might be another piece of work we need to look at outside this, in terms of how some of those contract issues are actually preventing what we all want to happen from happening.
Thank you very much. Got another question from LMF. They're asking, has there actually been anything installed under the LAD 2 scheme yet anywhere in the region?
In the northeastern Yorkshire, not yet. We are days away from our first elements being delivered, but okay. I don't think there's been any actual work carried out yet.
But,
just on that kind of BEIS release, they've just released the latest. So every month they release the figures on number of completions, which you probably see itself. So this is broken down per measure, per region, and there's a 2-month lag. So the data at the moment is only up until the end of May, but it shows about 1,800 measures have been installed from phase 1A. So it does take time to get these things mobilized, but yeah, it's a useful website to keep a track of progress. And
I think the next set of stats is due out either this week or early next week.
Brilliant, yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. I'm going to just ask if there's any other questions that anyone in the audience wishes to ask, because we've got through most of the ones in the chat. Just looking to see if there's anyone waving at me. Doesn't look like it at the moment. What are the 3 DPS that referred to? So what are the main DPSs that you're aware of, Tom, that that you think installers should be engaging with?
The ones which I'm most familiar with are so there's 5 energy hubs, and 3 of those have developed DPSs in the past several months. The one I'm most familiar with is the one which the Northwest have built up with Procure Plus. And then there are ones, as Ken and Gary were saying, the Greater Southeast have one, and the Midlands have developed one as well. And they all differ slightly because those hubs are all slightly different in nature, so they fill different gaps in terms of what they want for their region. But that's why I think it's important to have a session that looks at those 3 DPSs, and then people can understand where they want to go from there. And that includes local authorities as well.
I will point people that want information about DPSs to the previous videos on our YouTube channel, because there's we've spoken to each of those energy hubs, so there's information on the DPSs on each of those. If anyone wants it. I think there's one more question. Gary, you had another question?
I was just going to say I'll just discuss on my wrap up.
Okay.
Which I think is imminent anyway.
Yeah. Well, the question I thought you were going to ask was, when you mentioned the measures that are available under LADs, where does spray foam insulation fall? Is it available within the region or not? Because some local authorities seem to be doing spray foam insulation, others do not.
I would be surprised if it wasn't an eligible measure within one of the sort of bigger categories, so underfloor or EWI or however it's categorized, and then it would be down at an individual level, how the, I mean, to some extent, what supply chain the local authority got set up, how familiar they are with it as a measure. So there's a number of factors that would actually influence whether or not it's used. One of the things, because these programs keep coming at late notice, and there's very tight bid deadlines and they're very tight delivery deadlines, what it tends to do is box people into what's quite familiar, because that's one way to manage risk. If you have a series of very tight deadlines, it's actually quite risky to look at stuff that you're not familiar with. And so this is why we want to do some work around readiness, so we can get people familiar with things prior to deadlines coming up at very short notice. But it is a problem, and it is part of a wider discussion we need to have with BEIS, because one of the barriers to retrofit operating safely at scale is if people are constantly reverting to what they're familiar with, which means that in some areas spray foam might be used, and other areas it might not be, but it tends to be used going by familiarity rather than whether it genuinely provides a thermally efficient solution to a problem within a home. So there's quite a lot there which we need to. There was an interesting discussion earlier about the role of the hub, and this is what I mean about us not being a client for a lot of this work, but having quite a significant role in terms of saying to clients, trying to point them in a different direction and get them to client in a more sophisticated way, because we think that creates a lot of opportunity for your members.
Thank
If
you.
I can come back on that, we've spray foam has been brought up on all of these calls, and we've had it cleared with BBA, quality mark protection, and the manufacturers that there are at least two products, being BASF and another, because I can't remember off the top of my head. They've got the 25-year guarantees. They've got all of the things, and we spoke to Pete Rickaby about it, and he said as far as he was concerned they wouldn't be discounted, and it was really then a case of, okay, so if there is a problem, is it purely down to cost? Because of course you can install a lot more, sort of 3 or 4 to 1 on mineral wool, on pitch roof, as you can to spray foam. However, because the deadline is so tight, you can't afford to discount any of the measures if you're going to get the installs done. So I think it should be welcome, but that's not my decision. That's just my opinion on spray foam. And that's why I asked it, really, Tom. And I'm glad to hear that, on some of the projects, it will be open to be used. That's fantastic.
I don't know the criteria in that level of depth. I'm just making that assumption. I suppose what I'm more highlighting is that people tend to revert to a lot of very familiar practice, and if that familiar practice includes spray foam, then you're fine, and if it doesn't, then you're in trouble, because they just don't have time to familiarize themselves. So again, that sounds like another piece of work, which again, that feedback from your members is quite important to feedback to BEIS, which doesn't create an immediate solution, but does at least mean we can start to channel some supply chain feedback into the right place.
I know spray foam has been used on thousands of Green Homes vouchers without problems.
I am listening. I'm just making a note, because otherwise it'll drop out of my head. So
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Tom. I'm going to ask Nick one question here. We've been seeing a number of price increases across the supply chain for most measures, but especially insulation. How is air source heat pumps, or how are air source heat pumps comparing with the supply challenges that are currently facing the industry?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it becomes a bit of a supply and demand thing. So we have seen prices of heat pump installs increase recently, just down to the sheer shortage of installers out there, and the demand for work through funding. So it is a bit of a installer market at the moment. I mean, it's something that BEIS are very keen to try and keep a lid on and ensure that value for money remains really high. So yeah, I mean, we haven't particularly, we've had a sort of small increase in our sort of heat pumps themselves, but it is quite small. It's just a normal annual one. So we haven't inflated prices at all. I'm not aware of any of the manufacturers doing the same, but yeah, I think it is just down to supply and demand, and there's a huge shortage of installers that are sort of MCS and able to do project work. There's lots of sort of one-off installers out there, especially actually in the sort of Midlands and south of the country. That there's like a huge one-off sort of able to pay installer market. In the north and northwest, we've got much more like project work. So there's a bit of a north-south divide in terms of sort of the kind of install work. Yeah, but it is a bit of a challenging time at the moment because prices are increasing at a time when BEIS are trying to drive them down.
Yeah, that's good to hear that heat pump prices aren't escalating that quickly, because insulation we're seeing price rises of between 7% and 40%.
Right. Wow.
With another sort of 3 to 7% price increases expected after October. So it's a little bit worrying for some installers. But if the air source, if the supply of air source heat pumps is good, then that makes life easier for at least some of the market.
We're actually trying to, if anything, make it easier for installers. So some of the new, without getting too technical, some of the newer heat pumps I've got are just water connections rather than sort of refrigerant connections, which makes it a lot easier for installers to fit them. I've also got things like pre-plumb cylinders, which saves sort of half a day's labour on site as well by having a cylinder that's got all the pipework and the electrical box on it. So we're trying to sort of bring out newer products that makes things a lot easier for installers, just to I mean, it's mainly just to save time. So an install can take 2 days rather than 3 days. So that's helping.
Thank you very much, Nick. I think that's it, and I'll hand over to Gary for his wrap up, unless anyone has a final question. I think we're okay. So thank you very much, Nick. Thank you, Tom. Gary, I will let you sum up.
Thank you. Just off the back of that, Eric's just put on the radiators and consumables have had a price increase of about 10 to 12%. Just a very, very quick follow-on. Product shortages. Because of Brexit and COVID, have you found that there are product shortages?
Yeah, there has. I mean, we probably haven't suffered as much as some other areas of the sort of sector have, because with part of my role within Dakin is to try and keep us ahead of the curve a little bit with all these kind of funding streams. So we'd certainly know what's coming in terms of these big funding pots and new policies and strategies. And yeah, we've been able to sort of manufacture stock sort of 6 to 12 months in advance of all these things coming. So we haven't probably suffered as much as others, but yeah, we've still experienced some problems with certain heat pumps and accessories. Yeah, we haven't been completely free of it all, but yeah, I mean, just to be honest with you, it's often just a case of working really closely together with installers and clients, and just there's as much notice as we can get, we can avoid a lot of this. Okay. So yeah, it's just working close together.
Okay, brilliant. So one thing I'd like to ask everybody on the call, if you're experiencing price rises or product shortages, can you email me, please? We're feeding this information to BEIS. The idea is to try and get them to do an extension on LED 2. And we've already started working on this, and we've had several come in already that we've sent across to them. They need this information. So if anybody has those particular problems, please email me. On my wrap up, I'd like to say thanks very much, Tom, and thanks very much, Nick, for coming on the call. Albeit the Northeast and Yorkshire is a bit behind the curve, because obviously we lost the Energy Hub manager before, in fact, the day after the last Zoom call was due to happen. So thank you very much for making this happen. A couple of things I'd like to just go over. MVQ2, insulation and building treatment training. I've got 100% funding for companies that either work or have done work in South Yorkshire. So Doncaster, Barnsley, Rotherham, Sheffield. If you've worked there and you need any of your guys to be put through MVQ2, I've got 100% training funding. So give me a shout. Secondly, Kickstart scheme. We've been talking about green jobs. The EEA, we're very proud to have placed somewhere in the region of some between 20 and 30 people already. We've got a few hundred more to place. Just to give you an overview, these are 16 to 24-year-olds on universal credit. Predominantly they're 18 to 24 to be fair. There is an opportunity to bring those into our industry for 6 months, 25 hours a week, completely free of charge. And in fact, you'll even be given £1,000 to aid in their development. So you can spend it on computers or kit or whatever, training. And, we found that there is a big uptake in our industry wanting to bring in these youngsters. And the way we do it, we've actually had people say that when they've been given these youngsters, the departments are fighting over them. So it's really encouraging. So if you want to bring some youngsters into your business for 6 months, it's almost a try before you buy opportunity. Let's bring these youngsters in. Let's show them the longevity. We're getting all this funding coming through, but I keep hearing there's shortage of people. Well, let us help you. Finally, unfortunately, I've got to do this. Awards. We've got 12 regional awards we're going to run between the 1st of September and the 3rd of November. They cover the whole country now. So whether you've been involved in the awards or not, I know some on this call, the Yorkshire Awards, are already done and dusted and judged. We just can't wait to put them on. We've cancelled them enough and postponed them enough. And finally, it looks like we're going to actually get our way, unless Boris does a U-turn. That don't help, does it? So, yeah, the awards. So we've got the North East 2021 in October. Give us a shout. We'll help you with it. I'm looking for sponsors as well. Hint, hint. It's been great we can finally do this. Now, we've spoke about getting the 3 DPSs together and do a Zoom call on it. We'll facilitate it for you. But a second call I'd like to try and put together is a call on sustainable warmth. And actually put a call together, a UK call. So that people understand what HUGS is, understand what the different parts of sustainable warmth are. So I'll put that together. We'll send out a newsletter. I think we've increased the number of people we can have on a call, and therefore we can go up to 300. There's your challenge. Can we fill it? Sustainable warmth's a biggie. It runs till 2023. It's a good one. Let's try and create a bit of longevity for ourselves. Anybody on this call that's not a member, give us a shout. I'm going to wrap up. It's 2 to 3. It's warm. Again, I'd like to say very, very big thank you to Nick and Tom. Hopefully we can get things moving, and we'll try and get you the details and the links to these DPSs and see what we can work on together. And let's get this area really moving and thriving. So that's all from me, and thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much, Gary. I'm not going to say very much more, but just thank you everyone for joining us on the call, and thank you Tom and Nick for your contribution. It's been very helpful and very useful. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see everyone on the next one. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.